I saw a statistic that said over 80% of software engineers actually do not feel secure with their current salary. And looking back, I was actually no exception. I was making six figures at the age of 21 years old, and yet I was living paycheck to paycheck. After all the California taxes, living costs, and all the other expenses that I had, my entire paycheck was pretty much just being used up. And I did some thinking. I'm like, well, if I want to be a financially free, if I want to live a financially free life, what do I have to do, right? And I started thinking. And so in this video, I'm going to talk about specifically how you as a software engineer can become financially free and in essentially the fastest amount of time, not taking decades, 10, 20 years, I mean within the next 5 years. But before we actually jump into that, we first have to understand why can't we become financially free working a traditional 9 to 5? Interestingly enough, DICE did a study actually and found that 57% of software engineers in the United States are living paycheck to paycheck. That is simply crazy if you think about it, because on average they're making six figures, and yet because they are in San Francisco, the Bay Area, right, or in New York, where living expenses are through the roof, they're still living paycheck to paycheck, because if they're making, let's say, $110,000 to $120,000 a year, that's still barely enough to get them by in those cities, in those states. So at the end of the day, you're really left with one option. If you're a software engineer and you want to live a financially free job, especially if you don't have a remote job, especially if, let's say, you can't move from state to state and still keep your remote job, and even if you can do all those, you're still not going to be financially free. But for the regular software engineer who doesn't have those luxuries, who doesn't actually have those abilities, they're pretty much stuck in the everless grind. The grind of switching jobs every 2 years, hoping to maybe get a promotion, get a pay raise, and just keep hopping jobs until they maybe get to, FANG, Google, Netflix, or somewhere else like that, Uber, and maybe just work until they have enough stock options to maybe, go out and pursue their own venture or do something like that. But nevertheless, they're looking at a minimum of, I would say, 5 to 10 years. That's, I would say, even fast. For some people, they're considering maybe 10 to 20 years on a bigger scale. And I'm here to tell you that you don't have to go through all that. You don't have to wake up, clock into your 9 to 5, go in those 4-hour meetings sometimes that just drain 4 hours of your day. And I'm sure you're familiar with the daily stand-up meetings, the agile meetings, all these useless meetings that you go to and waste your entire day pretty much, where people talk about random stuff. It doesn't correlate to you, you don't really care about it, you just want to clock off, but you still have to show up to those meetings. And a lot of what people don't understand is that we as software engineers already pretty much we have everything in our arsenal to actually become an entrepreneur. As I mentioned before, most people think, well, I need to get more experience, right? I need to actually go work at this job, maybe get promoted, maybe, just wait a bit. They're always thinking of, no, I need more knowledge, I need to get more. And then they don't realize, but snap of a finger, time went by. 2 years, 4 years, 6 years, 8 years. I remember when I was still working back in the day, I remember seeing people in my company that have worked for the same company for 40 years, 50 years. They were already in their 50s and 60s, and I was just thinking to myself, like, how is that possible? How can you be with one company just stagnating like that? And it's not like they were partners or anything. They were sure they got senior positions. They had senior positions, but nevertheless, they were making maximum $300,000 a year. After taxes, what's left about $200K, $180K. That's just not the life that I wanted to live, especially not when I was still, young in my 20s, and I saw what was happening in the world. I saw the opportunities that I could be a part of. I did not want to live that kind of life. And so what I want to talk about first is with regards to your skills as a software engineer. Because all of you watching, whether you're a self-taught software engineer or you've gone through university, you'll know that the classes you had to take or the courses you had to take or whatever you did to learn what you know to become a software engineer was relatively difficult. A lot more difficult than any marketing, sales, or any of those kind of skills. You know what I mean? Especially if you come from university and you know those upper division classes with regards to all the algorithms, all the stuff regarding operating systems, hashes, and so on and so forth. But it can get quite complicated, which is why most people, graduate with a relatively average, quote-unquote, GPA. You don't see too many 4.0 GPAs graduating from university in an engineering degree or a computer science degree, because it's relatively difficult speaking to any other major. And the funny part is, despite difficulty in terms of the pay advantage that you get over other, majors or other careers, it's not that much. Sure, you might be ahead initially, right? You might be making about 120, $130,000, but your cap is about, let's say, what an average software engineer, regular software engineer can get to, maybe $200,000, $250,000 after 5 to 10 years. And maybe the 1% will get to actually FANG and get those $500,000 checks or something, but even that's very rare for those kinds of people. But somebody who maybe went into sales after university, within 2 or 3 years, they can be making that much money. So while you start off at a relatively high base, others actually, their growth is a lot more exponential compared to software engineering, because contrary to popular belief, software engineers' growth is pretty stagnant. The only way they're really going to grow is if they switch jobs every 2 years and hope that they get promoted. And especially with the market it is today, many software engineers saw the raw reality of what happens, in the job market, what could happen. Everybody thought that software engineering or computer science would be the last people on the planet to actually, suffer not having a job. But guess what? We saw what happened with COVID. Every single person, pretty much every single junior developer was having trouble finding a job because all the senior developers are taking the roles because they got laid off. But nevertheless, the only real solution to this problem of becoming financially free, you only have one choice, and that one choice is becoming an entrepreneur. But that shouldn't scare you. Instead, it should motivate you, because as a software engineer, you have the biggest advantage out of every single group, out of every single major, out of every single denomination, out of every single human being on this planet. Software engineers have the biggest advantage when it comes to entrepreneurship, especially nowadays with the current world that we're living in, with the technological advancements, our critical thinking skills, the way we actually code and the way we approach problems. We start from pseudocode, we plan it out, we analyze it, and then we build it. If something breaks, we fix it. We're familiar with that. We're familiar with the agile sprints. We're familiar with the language of problem solving, in a sense, to put it another way. And not only that, we're also familiar with project management. We're familiar with communicating with other folks. We're also familiar, I would say probably the most important thing here, we are familiar with debugging, right? We're familiar with seeing a problem, trying to come up with a solution, it may be not working as intended, and reiterating, trying something different, trying to see what we can fix to make it better. And that is the core essence of entrepreneurship. That is what you're doing, right? An entrepreneur is basically described as somebody who takes greater than normal risk to start a business to get greater than normal reward. So at the end of the day, it's nothing really fancy. An entrepreneur is just somebody who is going to take larger risk to get a larger reward in return. And as a software engineer, you've already been doing that since day one. The fact that you went to university and took on one of the hardest majors that a university can offer, knowing full well your grades might suffer or you might not be too well, you're going to challenge yourself, that was a risk that you took. And many people, the dropout rates are extremely high. You can see it in your own university. How many people dropped out of comp sci or engineering, right? So that by itself is already a risk. You're taking that high risk because you already have the preconception of, hey, if I graduate with an engineering degree or a comp sci degree, I'm going to get a 6-figure job, right? So you're taking high risk for a high reward. And entrepreneurship is the same exact thing. This is what I mean. Software engineers have an overwhelming advantage. And we just talked about more so the setup, how the entire setup of a software engineer is. But if we take a look at the raw facts, right, we're the most familiar with technology. We're dealing with technology every single day. Any single advancement, whether it's in AI or something else, we're at the core, we're at the forefront of it. Many people to this day still don't know how to utilize a computer too well, right? In terms of what we can do, what we can use a computer for, we're extremely versatile in that. So whether it's going to be a remote business or even something brick and mortar that we want to set up, we're still going to have an overwhelming advantage versus the regular person because we can automate things. We have knowledge into things that other people simply don't. And the barrier of entry into somebody coming into our space and trying to do what we're doing is a lot higher than us going into their space and trying to do what they're doing. So already pretty much if you had a plain sheet of paper and you had to create the perfect character, let's call it the most overpowered character that a video game could offer, and the sole goal of this character was to become an entrepreneur, you would literally list every single skill that a software engineer has. And that's what's so mental about this, is that most software engineers don't even realize this. But if you just take a look at a software engineer's life, or let's say the average software engineer, right? If you take a look at how their life goes, right? They'll start working in their 20s. They'll go from company to company, and they'll get to a point, maybe in their 40s or early 50s, late 40s, early 50s. They'll get in a point where they either they grow so much that there's no room to grow for them anymore, whether it's at the company or with the specific job that they're doing. They specialize in something so much that they naturally diverge into either co-founding their own firm or just doing something as a solopreneur. And that's most of the people. Other folks simply just stay with the same company and retire. But from what I've seen, most people actually do their own thing later on in their life. And I always thought about it. I'm like, well, why don't you just do it sooner, right? The only thing that forces you to do it later is because you already get to a point where you're kind of like, okay, I'm tired of it. And I already learned this much. I got to go do my own thing. I'm ready. But if you just do it when you're young, when you still have the energy, when you're still sharp, right? There you have a lot more advantage, especially me. In my specific case, when I wanted to tackle entrepreneurship, I didn't know anything about it. I thought you have to be born with it. I thought you were either born an entrepreneur or you're not. I didn't know it was a skill that you had to learn. And frankly enough, if somebody hadn't, I wish I had somebody like this tell me in a video and just point out every single advantage that I have over every other regular person. Because if I knew that earlier, I would have completely crushed them, right? But still, the fact that I still found myself into entrepreneurship, tried a bunch of different ventures, even though I literally sucked at them, I didn't know what the hell I was doing. The barrier of entry was still so low compared to what my major was, to what my actual software engineering was, right? I learned it on the fly like that. I remember my first ever success online was selling physical products on an e-commerce store on Shopify. And I remember getting to about $2,500 a day in terms of revenue. And I remember I pretty much didn't know how to market, didn't know how to sell, didn't know any of that stuff, didn't know how to do product research. But what I knew really well was to build a website. Well, I knew how to make a website. I knew how to make a responsive page. I knew how to make, a great user experience because I had both experience with front-end and back-end development. I knew all the ins and outs. I didn't need to utilize any outside plugins. If I needed a specific plugin to do something I needed to do, I could always program it. And so I had an extremely exquisite website with an amazing landing page, amazing response time. And since I was a software engineer and I did come from a background of something that, I adapt to things, I learned quickly. That's another advantage that all software engineers have. I learned the sales and marketing to an average degree, but I would even say better than average, within a few weeks. And even though now when I look back, they were, subpar, my ads were subpar, my messaging was subpar, my copy was subpar, the fact that my website was so good still allowed me to make a lot more money than I was capable of any 9 to 5 at the time, right? $2,500 a day of revenue is, with I had about $1,800, $1,600 to $1,800 of margin. That's a lot of money per day, right? And I remember, I'm like, well, I just, this took me a couple weeks, couple months to do. Imagine what I could do within a couple of years, right? If I just tried to make a business for a couple of years and I just put all my energy into that, imagine the thing I can build. And fast forward 3 years later, that's where I am now, right? And I think most people don't really realize that they can do a lot more than what I achieved because I wasn't the best student. I didn't have the highest grades. I wasn't the best even software engineer, I would say. I would always sometimes struggle with the homework, struggle with a few problems that I would solve. And I remember a lot of times, even when I was in project groups in university, I would usually be one of the last people to figure out a specific problem or do it. Most people would just instantly do it, and I would always have a couple bugs in my code that I would need to check and stuff. So I wasn't the best software engineer in a sense of just strictly coding. But what I did realize was that my skills are extremely transferable, and I can transfer those skills into pretty much any other venture I can get into. And I knew just from the fact that I learned everything to that point, I had an overwhelming advantage in everything I pretty much did. And that's what's so mental is that people don't understand that. If they can just understand the concept that them as software engineers have such an overwhelming advantage in business and entrepreneurship in general, that they're pretty much stupid for not getting into it, at least not trying it once. It just blows my mind. It's kind of like if you were born to 7 foot tall, extremely athletic, a lot of muscle on your frame, and you don't even try, any sports. That's how it feels to me. If you're a software engineer and you haven't gotten into entrepreneurship, you haven't even given it a try one time. Because you'll see, anything that you need to learn, you learn much faster. I don't know what it is. It's just maybe it's the way over time our brain developed to begin solving programming problems, but we grasp concepts at a much faster pace than the regular person does. We understand things much more differently, and I think we can connect things much better as well. I'm sure you probably have a familiar experience with this as well. But when I compare, the upper division classes that I took in university versus when I was learning about marketing or sales, all that stuff was way easier for me. It felt way easier than all the other random complicated stuff that I was doing at university, right? And especially even on the job, like what I was doing on my 9 to 5 job in terms of coding and stuff, trying to figure things out, felt way harder to me than making that much money online or even in a business or talking with other people, solving real world problems like that, right? So, and that's when I realized I'm like, oh, okay, our bar is pretty much set over here. And any other problem we're taking a look at is pretty much over here, right? The business side of things, at least. I'm sure there's other things if we take a look at, right? Maybe if we get into the medicine field or something, we try to grasp those concepts, it might be harder for us. But I feel like as software engineers, we just connect better with the business side of things. We understand it because we're more logical and analytical, and we have critical thinking skills that actually get backed up by our extremely good problem solving skills. Because like I said, the fact that we do pseudocode, which not a lot of people understand, but the fact that we as software engineers approach every single problem pretty much with pseudocode, we first take a look at see what the problem is, we break it down step by step, we see what we can do. If something is wrong, we reiterate. That is the core of how you come up with a solution and you bring a solution to the market. So every single person that's watching this, especially if you're a software engineer and you want to get financial freedom, look into entrepreneurship. I'm telling you, you have to rely on yourself to make money. You can't rely on no boss, you can't rely on no company. You have to rely on yourself and the knowledge that you have inside here to make money, right? And I'm telling you, if you just give it a try, and you don't have to, get into making a website, or you don't have to get into making a software or an app because you feel like you're a software engineer and have to code. No, I didn't do that. I got into a non-IT field at first, right? Like e-commerce. And the reason I got into it is because I knew I would have an overwhelming advantage when it came to specifically website development, right? And pretty much all the other things as well. I learned on the fly, but I still had that overwhelming advantage in coding, problem solving, and just finding solutions to things that maybe normal people wouldn't have. Even the fact that I know how to use a computer, that I have a high typing speed, that I maybe know websites that other people don't, that I can leverage Google to actually find answers because we are so familiar with Googling specific problems to our questions. All these little things that people don't even pay attention to, that people don't realize are skills, you realize how important they are when it comes to entrepreneurship. All these little things as a software engineer combine to just form this massive arsenal of weapons that you can just pick and choose anytime you want and just completely crush the competition. And every single time, pretty much I've convinced already all my software engineering friends to just get into this. And some of them already are extremely successful. Some more successful than me. I had a friend of mine who I convinced to get into it, and within 2 years, he's already at a company that's looking for an 8-figure exit. It's about a $50-60 million exit. And this is what I mean. It's like us software engineers have just such an overwhelming advantage in this. So I urge you, if you're a software engineer, at least give it a try once. You don't have to quit your job or anything drastic instantly. Just while you're doing on a job, just give it a try once and let me know what you think. As always, thank you for watching and Godspeed.